Hello, a very warm welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Sanam Shantier. Coming up on our programme this week, the US says Israeli settlements are no longer illegal, a reversal of 41 years of policy. Iran shuts down the internet amid violent protests across the country. We'll be joined by internet researcher Mahsa Ali Mardani to discuss the crackdown. Also on this week's programme, from Mosul to Baghdad, a song of solidarity and resistance. We'll bring you a report on a viral music video inspired by the TV series Casa de Papel. Thank you for watching Middle East Matters. Now, the US says it no longer considers Israeli settlements in the West Bank to be a violation of international law. This is a reversal of 4 decades of policy, further undermining the Palestinians' effort to gain statehood. France 24's Haxi Mez Belkin takes a look at why these settlements are so contentious.
For Palestinians, they're proof of a war waged in bricks and mortar. Thousands of settlements across the occupied territories that are home to over 600,000 Jews. Israeli communities established beyond Israel's internationally recognized borders are spread across 3 main areas. In the West Bank, there are 132 settlements, plus a further 121 outposts built without the Israeli government's approval. There are also 13 settlements in East Jerusalem and over 30 in the Golan Heights. All of them areas captured by Israel during the Six-Day War of 1967 and, according to the international community, occupied ever since. By far the greatest proportion of settlers, almost 430,000 of them, live in the occupied West Bank. Jews now make up 13% of the West Bank's population, living in settlements across the territory. Palestinians see the West Bank and East Jerusalem as the basis for a future Palestinian state. But settlements mean their hopes for a state with contiguous territory will remain just that. And the problem is only becoming more entrenched, not only due to a recent pledge by the Israeli Prime Minister to fully annex the West Bank's Jordan Valley, but also due to demographics. Despite international condemnation, settler communities continue to grow year on year. The Jewish population in the West Bank has more than doubled since 2001. A 2016 UN Security Council resolution said that Jewish settlements constitute a flagrant violation under international law. A non-binding declaration Israel, and now the USA too, seem happy to ignore.
In Iran, protesters have been clashing with security forces, leaving dozens dead. They've been taking to the streets to oppose an unexpected 50% hike in petrol prices. This measure is the latest sign of pressure on the country's economy after the reimposition of US sanctions. Meanwhile, the country has been experiencing a near total internet shutdown, this in a bid to stifle the protest movement. To talk about that, we're joined by Mahsa Ali Mardani. She's the Iran program officer at the human rights organization Article 19 and a specialist in Iran's security and internet policy. She joins us from London. Mahsa, thank you so much for being with us and speaking to us here on Middle East Matters. I want to start off with a look at the use of text messages. In an unprecedented move, Iranians are receiving SMSs. They're being encouraged to report on each other if they are indeed taking to the streets. They're also receiving messages telling them to leave the protest areas.
Yes, I've been hearing of this tactic. I think, telecom towers have been trying to locate cell phones that are in the vicinity of protests and have been telling them to vacate those areas. I mean, I think this tactic is more to induce fear, as it's not really identifying who's exactly at a protest location.
So it's having an impact, potentially. Now, earlier I mentioned near total blackout of the internet across the country. Some sources saying it stands at around 4 to 5%. Is that accurate?
So there's many different internet monitoring organizations doing really great work right now. There's NetBlocks, there's Internet Oracle, there's RIPE, there's IOTA. So there's all of these different organizations that are trying to monitor the different assigned numbers for the different internet service providers in Iran. It's very difficult to have a exact overview of an entire nation's internet infrastructure, but in generally it's pretty accurate to say that it is a near total blackout. I think there's been ups and downs in terms of the amount of connections that have been coming through. There's lots of people who have different internet connections that have been kind of sneaking through to the global internet, and I mean personally I've been able to connect with Iranians on and off who've been able to find, more tech-savvy routes to do so throughout the past few days. So I think, but they're offline, and I think it keeps on opening and contracting these abilities that people are finding.
And staying on that topic, why and how do you think the authorities were so quick to react this time? Usually it does take a few days.
I think we can think of a number of factors that have led to this really swift reaction. So it took the government about 24 hours to reach this near total blackout. It started Friday night when the protests started erupting in the smaller cities, and we got reports of people in the streets being disconnected from their mobile networks. But by Saturday afternoon, most of the country was offline. And I think this is part and parcel to a number of factors. One, it's been 10 years since 2009, one of the biggest protest outbreaks that actually resulted in a 45-minute internet shutdown nationwide. And so since then, there's been a lot of both offline and online security developments that have been trying to prepare for days like this. During the 2017-2018 protests, we saw a little insight into this, but it was nowhere near the scale and swiftness of this, because there is a lot of coordination that goes on, working with all the different internet service providers across the country and trying to coordinate the, disconnections. So this is definitely something they had been preparing for, and also the development of the National Information Network was kind of a cushion for the government to know that if they did go offline, things like banking, finance, hospitals, all of this national infrastructure that depends on internet connections could remain on a national network, and in some ways, the country wouldn't come to a standstill.
You mentioned banking and finance. I want to talk about the impact that this blackout is having on Iran's economy.
There's been a number of sources that have estimated somewhere around $300 million has been the cost of this for each day of this shutdown. It's not entirely known. Like I said, the banking infrastructure that has been relying on the National Information Network has been experiencing technical glitches. So I'm sure the government is suffering economic impact just from this, and we can see it from the currency fluctuations right now as well.
Mahsa Ali Mardani, internet researcher with Article 19 and the Oxford Internet Institute. Thank you so much for being with us here on Middle East Matters.
Thank you.
Now to what's been dubbed the Iran cables, 700 pages of leaked Iranian intelligence reports. The documents show how the Islamic Republic has outmaneuvered the US in the contest for regional influence. Here's Yuka Royar with the details.
Over 700 pages of top-secret documents right from Iran's intelligence ministry. A joint report published by The Intercept and The New York Times shows how aggressively Tehran has worked to get inside every aspect of Iraq's political, economic and religious life. The leaked cables sent by anonymous Iraqi operatives were mainly written in 2014 and 2015. One of the report's authors, Murtaza Hussain, spoke to France 24.
They date from the period roughly during ISIS's greatest ascendance in Iraq and Syria. And as such, a lot of the documents, in fact, deal with undercover Iranian operations to disrupt and destroy ISIS.
The revelations include how Iran recruited former CIA informants left jobless after the US pulled out of Iraq in 2011. The report says that at one point, the Iraqi side told the Iranian side, all of the Iraqi army's intelligence, consider it yours. It also describes how Iran sent a senior military officer last month to persuade Iraq's political class to keep Prime Minister Adel Abdul Mahdi in office, as anti-government and anti-Iranian protests were rocking parts of the country.
And as we see today in Iraq, there's a lot of anger about that Iranian role in the country, and the documents substantiate a lot of the protesters' grievances.
As the report came out, Iraqi protesters took to the streets to denounce Iranian influence, not just in Shiite-majority southern cities, but also in Baghdad.
Now, years of conflict and violence have left Iraq's cultural community dwindling. However, the recent anti-government protests have revived that scene. Like activists everywhere, protesters in the country have been using art to fight for change. Here's a look at a viral music video inspired by Spanish Netflix series La Casa de Papel.
It's an anti-fascist anthem now with an Iraqi twist. Brought back to popularity by Spanish series La Casa de Papel, Italian song Bella Ciao has become a rallying cry for generations resisting governments worldwide. Here in Mosul, Bella Ciao has become Blea Chara, meaning no way out.
We tried to change the lyrics of the song to show support for the revolution and for the rights of the Iraqi people.
The country has been gripped by protests since the start of October, but in the Sunni city of Mosul, demonstrators are hesitant to take to the streets, worried they'll be labeled as terrorists by Iraq's Shiite central government. The clip was the theater troupe's way of showing support for those on the front lines.
Tuk-tuk drivers have been working as ambulances and saving a lot of lives. It bothered us that we couldn't give them anything back.
Several weeks after their clip went viral, the group was finally able to travel to Baghdad, where they paid tribute to tuk-tuk drivers by doing what they do best.
Well, that's it for the show this week. Do stay tuned. More coming up on France 24.